They say some names are carved in stone while others are written in dust. I used to believe I was the dust. The day of my brother's promotion ceremony was crisp, full of the kind of military pride that hums beneath starched collars and glinting medals. The kind of day where everything looks in order even if some things are out of place. I arrived early. That's something you don't unlearn in the military. Being early is on time is late. My uniform was flawless. Every ribbon, every fold, every polished button had been triple checked. I even tied my hair the way my father always liked it when I wore the uniform tight clean, no excuses. I walked up to the entrance with my invitation in hand. I could already see them inside through the large glass doors, my parents, a few cousins, someone adjusting my brother's tie. They looked proud in a way I had never seen directed at me. The officer at the gate gave me a quick glance, then checked the list. Name Colonel Evelyn Shaw, I said, calm. He frowned, looked down the list again, then back at me. I'm sorry, ma'am, you're not on the guest list. I blinked. I have the invitation right here. He glanced at the paper, then back at his clipboard. I understand, but if your name's not on the official list, I can't let you in. Orders. I looked past him again. My father was laughing at something. My mother was smoothing down my brother's uniform. They hadn't seen me. Or maybe they had, and just didn't care enough to come get me. I swallowed it. Just like I always had. It's fine, I said quietly. I folded the invitation, placed it in my pocket, and walked away. I didn't argue. I didn't demand. I didn't beg. I disappeared again. That was the last day I spoke to any of them. No calls, no messages, no letters. I cut every tie without a single outburst. But here's what no one tells you: when the people who raised you pretend you don't exist, you start to believe them, at least for a while, until something colder than grief starts to rise in you. Not bitterness, not even revenge, just a need to stop waiting to be invited in, because that's what I did my whole life. I stood quietly outside of rooms where others were celebrated, hoping someone might turn around and wave me forward. That day at my brother's ceremony, I finally understood something. If you're always waiting to be seen, you forget how to see yourself. So I vanished for a while. Not out of weakness, but because I needed to find the version of me that didn't need a seat at their table. I started to rebuild piece by piece with no one watching. And I told myself, if I ever step into a room like that again, I won't wait for permission. I'll walk in because I've earned it. Years passed, and then one day, in a hall bigger than the one that turned me away, a voice echoed through the crowd. Now, please rise to welcome Colonel Evelyn Shaw. I stood, not because they finally saw me, but because I had never stopped existing. My story didn't begin in a uniform. It began in a house where silence spoke louder than praise, and where being born second meant being seen last. I was the quiet child, the girl who followed instructions and never raised her voice, the one who didn't cause problems but also never got a spotlight. My name is Evelyn Shaw, and long before anyone called me Colonel, I was just Evelyn, the daughter who always stood behind her older brother. His name is Marcus. He was the firstborn, the golden boy, the one who seemed to carry the entire family's expectations with ease. He was the first to win trophies, the first to bring home A's, the first to be praised at dinner, and the first to wear the uniform. He was what my father called a real man. I was just Evelyn. That was the tone, even if the words changed. My father had served 20 years in the Army and never let us forget it. He ran our household like a barracks, wake at 500. Chores before school, silence at the table, discipline above all. My mother was a nurse during the Gulf War. She rarely spoke of it, but the way her hands moved, calm, steady, clinical, told me that she had seen more pain than she could process. Together, they created a home where emotions were neat boxed and preferably not discussed. Marcus thrived there. He was louder, bolder, naturally commanding. He knew how to make our father laugh. He could turn silence into a stage and criticism into a challenge. I watched it all from the corners of rooms. I wasn't jealous, not exactly, just aware. Aware of how many times I wasn't mentioned. Aware of how every photo on the wall had Marcus in it, how every dinner conversation circled back to him. Even after I joined the military, it was the same. People assumed I followed Marcus's path. That couldn't be further from the truth. I joined because I needed a space where my name had weight, where performance mattered more than presence, where I didn't have to outshine anyone, just show up and do the job. I found my place in tactical operations. I had a knack for detail, for seeing what others overlooked. I wasn't flashy, but I was thorough. I became the person others relied on quietly, the one who made sure the mission didn't fall apart. It didn't matter if my father never asked about my deployments. It didn't matter if my mother sent me one-line emails that always ended with, "How's your brother?" What mattered was that in the field, I had value. Or at least I thought I did. There was one holiday I remember clearly. I'd come home for Thanksgiving just 2 weeks after completing a high-risk reconnaissance mission overseas. My unit had tracked and intercepted a supply chain that had eluded our forces for months. It wasn't headline-worthy, but it had saved lives. I sat quietly at the dinner table listening to my family praise Marcus for his recent training assignment. My mother showed off a newspaper clipping about him. My father toasted to his son, the future general. No one asked me how my tour went. No one asked what I'd been doing. When I mentioned I had received a commendation, my father raised an eyebrow and said, "They hand those out like candy now, huh?" I laughed. It was that kind of laugh you do when your chest caves in but your face doesn't move. That night, I sat on the back porch in my old hoodie, listening to the wind, wondering if maybe I was invisible in every uniform. Not just the one the Army gave me, but the one I'd worn since birth, the uniform of the forgotten. Over the years, the pattern deepened. Marcus got promoted fast. His name rose through the ranks like it had a tailwind. Mine crawled. Not because I was less competent, but because I didn't play politics. I didn't smile at the right people or brag at the right times. I just worked. That's all I knew how to do. I remember when we both ended up assigned to the same region. Different units, same territory. It was the first time in a decade we were on overlapping orders. I was leading a reconnaissance team in mountainous terrain. Marcus had been sent in as a tactical advisor. The overlap didn't make much sense on paper. He didn't know. The landscape didn't know the team, but when I asked command about it, they simply said, "He has visibility from higher up. Work with him." I should have asked more questions. I should have seen it coming, but part of me still believed in the chain of command. Part of me still believed in family. That belief cost me everything. What I didn't realize then, standing in that war room beside my brother, was that this would become the turning point. The moment that separated who I had been from who I would become. In that briefing, he smiled at me and said, "You still crawling through bushes, Eve?" I gave a small nod, tried to keep it professional. "Still cleaning up messes before they get bigger," I replied. He laughed, loudly. The room followed suit. He always knew how to make people follow his rhythm. But in that laugh, I felt it, the smallness again. The way he looked at me like I was a footnote in his story, like I'd never truly been more than background noise. And just like when we were kids, I swallowed it, smiled back, pretended it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than I wanted to admit, because that moment, that briefing, was the start of everything falling apart. And deep down, I think part of me already knew. The operation was supposed to be simple, low risk, high intel value, minimal engagement. A textbook reconnaissance mission in theory, but any soldier worth their boots knows the difference between paper and terrain. I had spent 3 weeks prepping for it, mapping routes, checking satellite passes, running simulations, planning exit strategies. My team trusted me and I trusted the data. We had run ops like this before, and we had learned the hard way that timing was everything. According to satellite surveillance, the compound we were watching had activity spikes every 8 hours. We planned our move for the window right after that spike, when the perimeter would be at its thinnest. Guards rotated out visibility optimal. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid. Then Marcus showed up. He wasn't part of my chain of command, but he was inserted as a tactical liaison, a fancy word for someone who makes suggestions without responsibility. From the moment he entered the planning room, I could tell he was uneasy. Not with the plan, but with the pace. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, voice casual as he asked, "Why wait till 0300 if we move now, we catch them off guard?" I shook my head. "We lose satellite coverage until 0150. That means no real-time support, no overwatch." He smirked. Sometimes speed is the intel. Besides, you're the one going in, not me. I looked at him hard. Exactly. That's why the timing matters. But it didn't matter what I said. He had already made a few calls, nudged a few contacts, and somehow command approved the shift. Just like that, 3 weeks of planning rewritten by one man's confidence. I didn't fight it, not out loud. I should have. But when you grow up being told that speaking up makes you difficult, eventually you stop before you start. I gave the order to move at 2200 hours. The terrain was steep, the canopy thick, and the moon gave us barely a sliver of light. We advanced in 3 squads, each staggered by 30 meters. I led the front unit. I remember the feel of the mud, the slow squish with every step, the smell of wet bark and adrenaline. I remember the hand signals, the tight lines, the sound of breath held in unison. We were ghosts in the dark, and then everything exploded. A tripwire, then 2, remote charges. We'd walked into a setup. Not a random one either, this was precise, deliberate, timed. Someone knew we were coming and exactly when. The first blast threw Corporal Ruiz 10 feet into a ravine. I heard his scream, then silence. The second knocked me flat. My comms went dead. Our flares fizzled on launch. Extraction was a nightmare. One of our Blackhawks took fire on approach and had to abort mid-descent. We lost 2 men that night. 3 more were injured so badly they never returned to active duty. And every one of those casualties wore the weight of my decision. When the debrief came, it was clinical. 3 officers, 1 recorder, no emotion. Why was the mission advanced, they asked. Was there new intel? I kept my voice steady. I was advised the window was closing. Who advised you? The lead officer asked. I paused. The truth sat heavy in my mouth. Captain Shaw offered the suggestion. What authority did he have to alter your mission plan? None, I admitted. The silence that followed was surgical, cold, precise. They didn't accuse him. They didn't even mention him again. The report came a week later, failure to adhere to operational protocol resulting in preventable loss. Suspension recommended pending further review. My rank was held in limbo, my clearance frozen. My credibility dissolved like it had never existed. Marcus never came to the inquiry. He submitted a 2-paragraph statement filled with vague language about fluid field conditions and real-time decisions. Not once did he reference the conversation we'd had, the pressure he'd applied, the consequences of his interference. My name took the hit. His stayed clean. When I called home, hoping naively that someone might say, "I'm sorry I got my father instead." "You made the call," he said. "You were in charge." My mother hovered in the background, wringing her hands, saying nothing. That night, I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, fully dressed in my now useless uniform, staring at the wall I used to pin school awards on. I waited for someone to knock, to say they still believed in me. No one came. The next morning, I found an envelope on the kitchen table with my name written in my mother's handwriting. I opened it, hoping for an apology. Inside was an invitation, Marcus's promotion ceremony. Captain to Major. Time, location, dress code. No note, no warmth, just facts. I could have torn it in half, burned it, but I didn't. Some twisted thread inside me still wanted to be seen, still hoped someone might turn and finally say, "She's ours too." I showed up, and they pretended I didn't exist. That's the part no one sees, not the explosion, not the hearing, but the erasure. Quiet, clean, complete. They erased me while smiling at him. That was the turning point. Not the blast, not the hearing, but the moment I realized my last name didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to him. And I had to decide, was I going to keep trying to borrow their light or start building my own? In the 72 hours that followed the failed mission, I lost more than my clearance and command. I lost my footing in every room I used to walk through with purpose. The suspension came with the usual language pending further internal review, but we all knew what it meant. I was benched, quietly shelved, not dishonorably discharged, not publicly condemned, just set aside like a file that no longer needed to be opened. I packed my things in silence, folding my name patch into a square, as if I could preserve something of who I had been. I returned my firearm, signed the paperwork, and left the base I had once felt proud to belong to. No one stopped me. No one asked me how I was doing. No one even looked surprised. That's what failure looks like in our world. It doesn't come with shouting or shame. It comes with doors quietly closing one by one until you're left outside with no map back in. I didn't go back to my apartment right away. I went home. I didn't even know why not, really. Maybe I thought being near the people who raised me would give me some ground to stand on, some version of comfort, or at least clarity. Instead, I stepped into a living room frozen in time where my father was polishing a photo of Marcus in his new dress blues, and my mother was rearranging medals on a shelf that bore no trace of me. I stood there, uniform still pressed, hands empty, waiting. My father looked up once. He didn't smile. "You made a bad call," he said flatly. I nodded slowly. "I didn't make it alone." He shrugged. "But you were in charge." I turned to my mother. Her eyes met mine, then dropped to the floor. "It's a stain," she whispered. "The uniform doesn't forgive easily." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mouth had gone dry. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand why they couldn't see me, but all I managed was a nod, and then I walked upstairs like I had when I was 16, trying not to let the creak in the third step give away how broken I felt. I sat on the edge of my old bed in a room that hadn't changed in over a decade. Same wallpaper, same dusty trophies, same books lined up like nothing had happened. I stared at the ceiling for hours, wondering if maybe I had been the problem all along. If maybe being invisible was safer than being noticed and then discarded. I slept in my uniform that night, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I didn't know who I was without it. In the morning, I came downstairs and saw the envelope. My name in my mother's delicate handwriting. Hope bloomed for a second. I thought maybe this is it, an apology, a sign of support, something. I opened it carefully. Inside, an invitation. Marcus's promotion ceremony. Major Shaw. Location, time, dress code. No personal note. No warmth. Just facts. I stared at it, then at the kitchen clock. I could have screamed. I could have ripped it into pieces and thrown it in the sink. But instead, I folded it back into the envelope and put it in my pocket. That night, I boarded a train, traveled for 6 hours, and arrived at the venue early. I told myself I needed closure. I told myself it would be the last time. My boots echoed against the polished floor as I approached the main gate. I could see the crowd inside laughing, toasting, dressed in their best. I handed my invitation to the officer. He scanned the list, then frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am, you're not on the guest list." I blinked. "I have the official invitation." He looked again. "Your name's not here. I can't let you in without clearance." I looked through the glass, saw my father clapping someone on the back, my mother adjusting Marcus's jacket, her face lit with pride. They hadn't seen me. Or they had, and chose not to say a word. I stepped back. "It's fine," I said, voice barely audible. And I walked away. No scene, no protest, just silence. That's the moment my family ended, not with a fight, but with their choice to pretend I wasn't standing right there. I never called again. I blocked every number that shared my last name. I deleted every family photo from my phone. I didn't burn bridges. I just turned and walked so far they couldn't find the path back even if they tried. And they didn't. In the months that followed, I didn't wear my uniform. I didn't check military bulletins. I didn't reply to messages from old teammates. I moved to a small town 3 states away, rented a 1-bedroom apartment above a hardware store, and tried to build a life that didn't revolve around rank or rules. Every morning I ran 5 miles through empty streets. Not for training, for silence. Every night I sat by the window with a mug of tea and stared at nothing, trying to erase the echoes of Marcus's laugh, my father's shrug, my mother's downcast eyes. Some nights I dreamed of the explosion. Other nights I dreamed of Ruiz's face, still and cold in the dirt. But the worst dreams were the quiet ones where I sat at my own kitchen table and no one spoke to me. It would have been easy to collapse under it all. To believe them. To accept that maybe I had failed and that was all there was to it. But something else began to rise in me, slow and sharp like a blade forged in stillness. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't vengeance. It was a need for truth. Not for them. Not for command. For me. Because if I was going to disappear, I needed to know whether I deserved it. I needed to know what really happened that night in the jungle. So I started digging. Quietly. patiently, not through official channels, those were closed to me, but through the people who still remembered who I was before the fall. People who'd served beside me, who knew I wasn't reckless, who trusted the way I worked a map or read terrain like it spoke to me. I reached out. I asked for old logs, archived satellite data, anything. One by one, they started to appear. Attachments sent from personal emails, files with gaps but enough to trace, and what I found made my blood freeze. The first file came from a former intelligence officer I'd worked with on a prior mission in Syria. She didn't ask why I wanted the satellite logs, she just sent them. No questions. That's the thing about people who've bled beside you, they don't need long explanations. The file was grainy time-stamped, cluttered with data. I pored over every frame, cross-referencing it with the mission report. And there it was plain as day. Our original satellite pass was never canceled. The coverage remained active at the time we had originally planned to go in. The surveillance hadn't failed, it had simply been ignored. And there was more. A second file appeared from a logistics officer out of Fort Carson. He had served under Marcus in a prior rotation and had grown wary of the way Marcus operated bold moves, minimal input glory chasing. He forwarded me a chat log. It was internal, dated the day before our mission. In it, Marcus wrote to a planning coordinator, "We need to move up the op. Can't wait for her recon pass. Trust me, I'll take the heat if it goes sideways." There was the truth, black and white. He knew the plan. He knew the risks. And he had gone around me anyway. Worse, he had promised to take the consequences and then disappeared when they came. I sat with that line for hours. "Trust me, I'll take the heat." I read it again and again until the words lost meaning, until all I could hear was the sound of Ruiz's comm going silent and the blast echoing in the back of my skull. I had carried the burden of that night like it belonged to me alone, but it never had. I was good at reading maps, at plotting terrain, but I hadn't seen the ambush coming because I had been forced to move blind. Not because of a bad decision, but because I had trusted a system that let one man whisper louder than facts. And that man had my blood. That was the part that gutted me the most. It wasn't some faceless superior who sabotaged the mission. It was Marcus, my brother, the one they raised as a hero while I became a question mark. I didn't scream. I didn't call him. I didn't write some angry letter demanding answers. I just kept digging, quietly, methodically. I pulled every document, every message, every overlooked file I could legally access. I put together a timeline, cross-verified the chain of decision, and assembled a report. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't dramatic, but it was airtight. I didn't go to the press. I wasn't chasing scandal. I sent it straight to the Office of Military Ethics, encrypted, untagged, unsigned, except for one line at the bottom. Truth matters even when no one's watching. Then I waited. Days turned into weeks. I kept running, kept staring out the window. I tried not to hope, tried not to imagine anything changing, until one morning my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, another call, then a third. The fourth time I answered. The voice on the other end was calm, older, familiar. Colonel Rhodes. He had been my commanding officer during my first tour. He said, "We owe you more than an apology, Shaw." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. He continued, "We've reviewed your report. It's been confirmed. The authorization to alter the mission did not come from command. Your decision followed protocol. Your record is being amended and your suspension lifted effective immediately." Still, I said nothing. Words didn't feel like enough. He added, "You're also being recommended for reappointment, higher placement. Your name's been submitted." I swallowed hard. "Reinstated to what I asked." He hesitated. "Colonel, Department of Tactical Strategy. You'd be overseeing multi-regional ops. It's more than a field command. You'd be writing the plans others follow." I closed my eyes. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because for the first time in years, something inside me wasn't collapsing. It was steady, rooted. I didn't say yes right away. I told him I needed time. He said, "You've earned it." Then he hung up. I sat with that call for hours. My coffee went cold. My hands didn't move. Because this wasn't about getting back what I lost. It was about owning who I had become. They had tried to erase me. But now, they needed me. Not for politics, not for image, for results. And that mattered more than any uniform ever had. A week later, I sent my response. One word, ready. I returned to base not with fanfare, but with purpose. No welcome party, no standing ovation. Just a desk, a briefing room, a job. I took it. I studied every mission like it was a chessboard, and I was playing blindfolded. I rewrote protocols. I retrained officers. I built plans that bent but never broke. Slowly, my name began to show up again, not as a footnote, but as a headline in strategic memos. And every time it did, I remembered that line Marcus wrote, "I'll take the heat." But he never did. I did. I took the heat, the silence, the shame. And then I turned it into fire. Not the kind that burns others down. The kind that clears the forest for something new to grow. The official ceremony wasn't on my radar until the invitation landed in my inbox marked high priority. It was for the upcoming anniversary of the 12th Infantry Division, the same division that had once sidelined me without hesitation. The event was formal high-level reserved for senior personnel and distinguished guests. The language was sterile but clear, recognition of outstanding leadership and contributions to modern strategic doctrine. My name wasn't just on the invite, it was listed among the honorees. I stared at the screen for a long time, the glow of the monitor soft against the early evening dark. There were other names on the list, too, familiar ones. One caught my eye like a splinter, Colonel Arthur Shaw, my father. Another, Major Marcus Shaw, my brother. The irony hit like a slow ache. Years ago, I stood outside a ceremony I wasn't allowed to enter, holding an invitation no one honored. Now, I was walking back in this time, not as an observer, not as an afterthought, but as a cornerstone. The hall was massive, converted from an old armory into something elegant. Crystal lights hung from steel rafters, polished floors, banners lined with emblems of service duty sacrifice. I arrived early again. That habit would never die. My uniform was flawless. My insignia colonel rested high and unmistakable on my shoulders. My heels clicked with every step, the sound sharp but measured. Eyes turned, some widened, others narrowed, but no one looked away. I walked the corridor past portraits of past commanders' battle honors and displays of valor. The past lived on those walls. I had once believed I would never be part of it, but now there I was, etched into the program, listed as a lead architect of the new strategic command structure. People greeted me with nods, salutes, even hesitant admiration. No one mentioned the past. No one needed to. The ceremony began with the usual order recognitions, ribbons, speeches full of phrases like courage under fire and unwavering commitment. I listened, silent hands behind my back. Then the host stepped to the podium. Tonight, he said, we recognize not only those who have served, but those who have transformed the way we serve. A hush settled over the crowd. Colonel Evelyn Shaw is more than a leader. She is a force of precision, resilience, and integrity. Her strategies have saved lives. Her decisions have shaped outcomes. Her legacy is already in motion. My name echoed across the room like a drumbeat. Then came the words that stopped my breath. Please rise and join us at the front, Colonel Shaw. For a moment, everything stilled. The same girl who had once been told, "You're not on the list now," had every eye turned toward her. I walked forward slowly, not to bask, but to claim. The general presenting the award met me at the center. He pinned the medal just above my heart, leaned in, and whispered, "They'll study your doctrine for years." I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I simply nodded. This wasn't triumph. This was return. This was proof. After the applause faded, I stepped back into formation, not above anyone, among them. As I stood there, I glanced across the room. I saw them, my father upright as ever, but quieter. My mother, hands clasped tightly in her lap. And Marcus, eyes locked on me like he couldn't decide whether I was real or not. I didn't wave. I didn't nod. I just stood there, grounded and unshaken. Because this time, I wasn't waiting to be seen. I already knew who I was. After the ceremony, I stayed behind longer than I needed to. I shook hands, accepted congratulations with measured nods, responded to praise with a kind of practiced humility that never fully reached my eyes. I wasn't there for the applause. I was waiting. I knew they would come. Eventually, they did. I saw them before they saw me, standing in a corner of the lobby like a family portrait no one asked to pose for. My father looked smaller than I remembered, not in stature, but in presence. My mother's eyes kept shifting between the floor and the walls anywhere but toward mine. Marcus stood at the center, still in his uniform, still perfectly composed, but his jaw was tight, his shoulders stiff. He was unraveling under the weight of something he didn't want to name. I didn't approach them. I waited, let the silence work the way it had worked on me for years. Finally, my father stepped forward. "Evelyn," he said, just my name. No rank, no title. Just the same tone he used to use when I'd come home with scraped knees and no ribbons to show for it. I met his gaze without flinching. "You didn't tell us," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't ask." He flinched barely, but I saw it. My mother moved beside him, her voice soft. "All these years, you could have said something." I nodded slowly. "I did. You just listened to someone else louder." Marcus finally spoke. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said, and his voice wasn't as steady as he wanted it to be. "That night, things spiraled." I tilted my head. "Things didn't spiral, Marcus. You moved the timeline. You ignored protocol. You said you'd take the heat, and you vanished when it came." He looked down. "I thought I was helping." "You thought you were right," I replied. "And when it went wrong, you let me burn for it." He opened his mouth, but I lifted my hand. "I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to fix what can't be fixed." My voice was calm, almost quiet. "I came because I earned my place, not because I needed your permission to be here." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We were wrong," she whispered. "We didn't know how to believe you." I didn't comfort her. I didn't rage either. I just breathed. I didn't need belief. I needed backup. The words settled between us like dust. My father stared at the floor, silent. Marcus looked like he wanted to say something else, but couldn't find the shape of it. I took a step closer, not out of anger, but out of clarity. "You taught me that family is loyalty," I said, "but you broke that rule before I ever did. You believed I failed before you ever asked why. You stood beside the one who had everything and left behind the one who built herself from nothing." I looked at each of them one by one. "You chose silence. I chose truth. You chose comfort. I chose integrity." My gaze landed on Marcus. "I don't hate you, but I will never forget what you let happen to me. I carried that alone, and I learned to grow stronger because of it." I paused. Let the weight of that truth rest in the air. Then I said it, the thing I had waited my entire life to say. I don't need to be invited to the table anymore, because now I build my own. None of them spoke, not because they had nothing to say, but because they finally understood they had no defense left. And that somehow was enough. I stepped out of that hall into the cool night air, the sounds of the ceremony still echoing faintly behind me like a distant drum I no longer needed to march to. The stars were scattered across the sky, quiet and indifferent, just as they had been the night of the mission that broke me. But this time they didn't look like reminders. They looked like markers, silent witnesses to the long road I had walked to get here. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. And that's a feeling no applause can give you. For years, I'd carried the weight of erasure like it was a second skin. I had been the soldier no one talked about, the officer who vanished from the reports, the sister who wasn't mentioned in family calls. And slowly, quietly, without spectacle, I had rebuilt myself into someone even I didn't recognize at first. Not someone stronger than the past, but someone who had stopped needing it to make sense. The truth is, I never wanted revenge. I didn't need Marcus to fall. I didn't need my father to apologize. I didn't need my mother to cry. What I needed, what I fought for, was the right to exist fully, visibly, without having to shout or beg for space. And now I had that. My office overlooked the main training compound at command headquarters. Every morning I arrived early. Not out of obligation, but because I liked the quiet before the noise. I'd watch the new recruits file in their boots, too clean their salutes, too sharp, their eyes full of questions they hadn't learned how to ask yet. I saw in them versions of myself lost in the machinery trying to matter without being seen as a problem. Some of them would linger after drills asking about my strategies, my missions, my rise through the ranks. One young lieutenant asked me once, "Ma'am, how did you come back from everything?" I paused before answering. Then I said, "By not waiting for anyone to come get me." That's the part no one tells you. Some rescues are self-led. Some homes are built from the ashes of the one that burned you. I didn't move back to my hometown. I didn't rekindle ties that were too dry to catch again. But I no longer carried anger toward them either. I carried clarity. And that was lighter. When my name was added to the official strategy doctrine of the U.S. Army, it was accompanied by no press release, no headlines. Just a footnote at the bottom of a document that thousands of soldiers would read in the years to come. That was enough. Legacy doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrives in the way a room listens when you speak, or how no one questions your place at the table, or how the people who once overlooked you now pause before dismissing anyone else like you. I found peace not in recognition, but in the absence of doubt. I stopped needing to prove I belonged because I had redefined what belonging meant. It wasn't about them. It never really had been. It was about building something real from what was left. Not every story ends with justice. Not every wound heals clean. But mine found its shape in the silence I used to fear, the silence I now own. And in that silence, I've learned that some people spend their lives chasing validation. Some waste years trying to get back into rooms that closed on them long ago. And others, people like me, we stop knocking. We find new doors. We build new walls. And when they ask how we did it, we don't answer with vengeance or rage. We answer with presence. We answer by standing tall in the uniform they tried to take from us. And when they look at us and say, "We didn't know," we look back and say, "I did." And I kept going anyway. Because that's what survival really is. It's not just living through it. It's becoming someone they can't erase. Someone they have to name. And not because they want to, because now they have no choice.